gets carefully counted.
شارك الدكتوراه المنتخبون انتخبوا بشير، وإن شاء الله نكون من جديد الانتخابات وينتخبوني إن شاء الله.
جميعا راح تكون اليوم في هذه القاعة مشاركتنا تدشين الجلسة الأولى للبرلمان الأفريقي.
جدا أول مرة ندخل مجلس النواب. ضخم.
شو يعني ما فيش توتر أبدا، يعني إن شاء الله نشارك ونقدم أفضل ما لدينا، وهذا يوم عظيم إنه اليوم بتهتم بالديمقراطية لهذه الدرجة.
Children's voices, as represented through the elected members in the Children's Parliament, are now being heard not only in Parliament but across Yemen. Further to this, they are influencing policy to further the rights of children. You have a heavy responsibility in representing the issues of those that have elected you and all children in Yemen. We are listening to what you have to say.
شعر رائع جدا، قوة إن شاء الله، يعني نمثل اليمن بشكل جيد إن شاء الله. كل جينا لإخوة اليمن.
A new world driven by new media.
This is a very peculiar moment in media history.
Analyzing the media's role in shaping modern history. The Listening Post, at this time on AlJazeera.
As geeks take on dictators, bloggers turn dissidents, and social networks root for social justice, governments are going cyber, spying on their citizens, erecting firewalls like iron curtains, and closing down websites. We ask, is cyber-generated change virtual or real? Empire at this time on AlJazeera.
Unpopular with some at home, untested overseas. The first year has not been easy for David Cameron and his coalition government. In conjunction with YouTube, AlJazeera asks your questions to the British Prime Minister. World View, an interview with David Cameron. at this time on Al Jazeera.
If you're a Nokia user, you can download Al Jazeera's news widget from Nokia's Ovis store. The news widget, available on compatible Nokia devices, gives users quick and easy access to real-time news updates from Al Jazeera English. See the world in real time. Al Jazeera Mobile.
The times change. The instruments evolve. The battlegrounds shift.
This is America! Our country!
But the international struggle continues.
He was murdered!
Uncompromising, hard-hitting investigations.
I can't get no justice from no one in Jamaica.
People and power, at this time on Al Jazeera.
As protests, violence, and the call for political reform spreads across the Arab world, Al Jazeera's in-depth coverage of events on the ground brings you the news as it breaks. Ongoing coverage of the Libya uprising on Al Jazeera.
Iraq's largest oil refinery shut down. Officials blame attackers armed with guns and bombs. Hello, welcome to Al Jazeera, live from Doha. I'm Sami Zaidan. We're live in Baghdad in a moment, plus the very latest on Libya. It's not over. Gaddafi rallies his supporters in Tripoli. Elsewhere in the capital, Gaddafi loyalists open fire on protesters. More Libyans die on the streets. The UN says it's time for action.
The violence must stop. Those responsible for so brutally shedding the blood of innocents must be punished.
Well, we start with news of an attack on Iraq's largest oil refinery. Officials say gunmen burst into the Beji plant 180 kilometers north of Baghdad, shooting dead staff and planting bombs. Well, the refinery, of course, produces about half of the refined petroleum products that are used for domestic consumption within Iraq. Analysts say it may not have a whole lot of impact on Iraq's oil exports and exporting capability, but it still is a significant attack. I believe our correspondent, Jane Arraf, is live in the Iraqi capital for us. Jane, what more can you tell us about this?
Well, Sammy, we've just spoken to the deputy director, actually, of the Beji complex, and he tells us that at about 4 in the morning, gunmen did burst in, but the major injuries and the one casualty of an engineer was caused by bombs that were set off and smoke inhalation. Essentially, these gunmen burst in, laid bombs, set them off. They set the refinery on fire, that part of the refinery, essentially shutting it down and killing one of the engineers. Another one was seriously wounded. Now, this is expected to take that part of the refinery out of commission for the next several weeks. He actually says one of the problems has been that it was underprotected, and they will have to beef up security. People, he says, are afraid to come back to work. This is an area that had been a stronghold of Al-Qaeda, but quite calm recently. This could mark a worrying return to attacks on the oil installations and the refineries.
Jane, I spoke to an analyst just a short while ago who pointed out that the announcement didn't come from those officials responsible for the refinery. Is there any reason to doubt the official version of events?
Well, as journalists, as you know, there's often a lot of reason to, in general, to doubt the official version of events. But in this case, they all seem to match. The people we've spoken to, including other sources at the North Oil Company, which is responsible for it, appears to indicate that it was an attack, that bombs were set, that the fire went off. The discrepancy appears to be whether people were shot or whether they died from the fire, and really the specific manner of the attack. But indisputably, refinery, there is an attack. And when an oil official tells us that his refinery is underprotected, that in itself is incredibly significant. That's not something they usually publicly complain about.
What will this mean for supplies of petroleum products on the domestic market now?
That is, as you point out, the big impact. It doesn't have an effect on exports because this is what they call downstream. It's after the crude oil is produced and it's taken to the refineries. Now, this refinery complex is the biggest in the north, where a lot of Iraq's oil installations are. It produces gasoline and kerosene. Kerosene used for heating oil, and gasoline obviously used to keep the country running. Now, one of the huge problems that people have had, and one of the sources of discontent, is gasoline. It's going to cut down on the availability. There are going to be longer lines. The prices are going to be higher on the black market, where a lot of people actually buy their gasoline. And all in all, it's going to contribute to that feeling that Iraqis have, which has sent them out to the streets to protest, that their government can't take care of them, that they can't keep them safe, and they can't supply them with the basics of everyday life.
All right, Jane Arraf, thanks for that update from Baghdad. Well, to Libya now, where long-time ruler Muammar al-Gaddafi has made another defiant address, vowing he will not step down. Well, this is in the face of growing support for anti-government demonstrators, both at home and abroad. There's been a call for concrete action by the UN chief, and its most powerful body votes on fresh sanctions against Gaddafi and his entourage. This after the Libyan leader joined his supporters in the capital, again vowing not to step down and to fight to the end. These are the implications. Protesters fired upon in Tripoli, where another crackdown began after Friday prayers. We'll hear from someone who was there. Just 50 kilometers away in Zawiya, there was a very different picture. This amateur video appears to show more soldiers switching sides. Tarek Baisley has the details.
Riding high on the shoulders of their countrymen, this video, which cannot be independently verified, appears to show army officers in the city of Zawiya. Having turned against the government, they now enjoy the support of the protesters. It's a scene anti-government demonstrators say is being repeated across the country as the government loses control of more and more areas. In the eastern city of Benghazi, calls for Muammar Gaddafi to be brought to justice.
We do not want him to flee to another country. We want to punish him because he shed Libyan blood. He killed our young people.
And in the capital, Tripoli, this footage appears to show anti-Gaddafi protesters moving unchallenged